Well, let me introduce myself and then I'll introduce you. My name is Brad Stone. I'm a senior executive editor for global tech at Bloomberg and the author of a couple of books about technology. Stefan, if you follow anything related to crypto, you probably already know who he is, but I will read from his Twitter bio. Open source developer and distributed systems advocate, co-creator of Interledger, founder and CEO of COIL. Just to unpack that a bit, Stefan joined the crypto community back in 2010, produced the popular What is Bitcoin video, introducing millions of users to Bitcoin, and created Bitcoin.js, the first implementation of Bitcoin cryptography in the browser. He was one of the first employees and the CTO at Ripple, and as part of that work, co-created the Interledger, an open internet-like protocol for value transfer. And in 2018, he founded COIL with the vision to create a better business model for the web that's not reliant on advertising or subscription services. Stefan, I just am now noticing that your Twitter handle is Just Moon. Does that mean you're throwing in with Elon and Jeff and heading out to space?
I'm so glad you asked that, because like everyone assumes that, but I picked the name when I was 12, and the term going to the moon in terms of financial success didn't really exist yet, so it has nothing to do with that, unfortunately.
Well, that's disappointing, because I've known you for a long time, and if you were going to the moon, I could, maybe I could beg a seat on the ship, but okay, well, so not anytime soon. I feel like we need to start with the news of the day. Like a lot of people, I've been doom scrolling Twitter all day looking at the news of the Ukrainian invasion. I have CNN on in the background right now. You're from Germany. As a European, I just wonder how you feel about the crisis, and is there a role for the crypto or the blockchain community to play today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've been the same thing here. Like, I've been trying to get as much information as possible. It's incredible tragedy and so sad to see that so close to home. And then, of course, I have a lot of friends who are from Ukraine, still have family there, and so my heart goes out to all the people who are affected by this. And you asked about, what is the connection to crypto, and I think it's kind of interesting. Like, a lot of people are pointing out that crypto has been down today, contrary to the narrative that, hey, it's sort of a safe haven in times of crisis. I think that there are obviously different people are using crypto for different reasons, right? And so you're seeing kind of the different things overlapping. And I think what's driving the price right now, what's dominating the price action is pretty much like speculation and a lot of Wall Street type institutional investors. And so it makes sense that it would act similarly to other speculative assets in this kind of situation. But I do think that that's notwithstanding that there is an underlying potential use where people might say, like, hey, I'm going to hold on to some Bitcoin just in case I do have to pick up and leave quickly, and I have to be mobile and have my assets with me and things like that. Like, I've moved internationally recently, and as in previous times that I've moved internationally, my crypto has been the easiest asset to bring along. So I do think that there is a role for crypto in that area. We're just seeing other factors dominating right now.
I mean, it just feels like the price of Bitcoin is down today, has been down this week, is about half of what it was in the fall. So it seems like theoretically what you're saying still holds true, but the market really questions the idea right now that these assets are safe havens or solutions in times of political instability. Is it just that other narrative, the Wall Street gambling narrative, has kind of overpowered the idealism that Bitcoin once represented?
Yeah, I mean, there's many sources of demand and many sources of supply for any asset or good, right? And so sometimes you just have a type of demand, in this case, speculative demand, that's just driving or dominant because it's just so much outpacing all the other forms of demand for that asset. And so when that demand suddenly drops because the same people who were previously speculating on it, like they're less interested in being as leveraged, et cetera, they want to take some of the risk off the table. that obviously affects the price because that demand suddenly disappears. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other sources of demand that just are operating on a smaller scale than the very highly leveraged people.
Right. And I want to continue on this thread, but you did mention that you have family, and I would imagine some colleagues in the open source community in Ukraine. Yeah, I'm just curious, are you hearing anything from them today? And how's the mood there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm from Germany. I hear mostly what my family is saying in Germany, and of course they are very concerned. They don't know what's going to happen, and it does. It feels like we're almost a little bit on a path of repeating some of the mistakes from the last century, and obviously I hope that we can pull ourselves back from the brink, but it's certainly not a century that anyone wants to repeat. So
Right.
Very scary. I think that we are living through a time of great uncertainty, and I'm, as a technologist, I'm always thinking about like, what can I contribute, and maybe this is where we talk a little bit about what the role of crypto and blockchain and these types of technologies can be in a more uncertain world like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good thread for us to pursue. But let's rewind a little bit and go back to 2010, and you discover Bitcoin. You produce the famous "What is Bitcoin" video. I think in 2012 or 13, you start with Ripple. And I remember reading on one of your bios that your dream was to make cryptocurrency mainstream. And like you guys have succeeded beyond all possible imagination. And yet mainstream crypto are things, Dogecoin and the Let's Go Brandon crypto coin and all the rampant speculation we're talking about. Like, is this what you imagined when you first got into this field?
Not at all. And in an interesting way, it's sort of fun looking back now and kind of thinking about what I thought would happen, what actually happened. And of course, in hindsight, it all makes perfect sense. But when I first got interested in crypto, the best thing that I can sort of point to is when you read the actual Satoshi's actual white paper from the original Bitcoin white paper. He thinks about it as a payment system, right? Like a type of cash to replace physical cash, but to be more easily transferable across large distances. And so he obviously was coming from a bit of a libertarian kind of mindset. You can see that in a lot of his postings. But at the same time, the primary purpose was really as a way for people to do commerce, not so much just as an investment that you just sit and hodl, as people say, right? And so really that narrative started, I would say as early as 2011. That's really when you started to see people saying like, hey, this could be really valuable. I mean, some people obviously realized that sooner, but it really didn't become the dominant narrative until 2011, 2012. And then very quickly took over all of the air in the room. And I think that for me, I got into Bitcoin because I was interested in its role and a potential role in payments. And to this day, that's still the thing I'm more passionate about. And so for me, it's a little bit sad that so much of the attention has moved away from that. I think there are some people who are still working on that. I will give a shout out to the Lightning Network and anyone who works on that, because they're definitely trying to make Bitcoin easier to transact with day to day. And of course, I myself have dedicated a lot of my time over the last 5, 6 years, 7 years, even, on Interledger, which is it's a similar technology but less specific to any one asset.
Right. I mean, isn't one of the problems though that like when currencies became easier to transact online, when currencies became easier to exchange globally, that like it was immediately weaponized by bad actors, right? How much of that kind of tortured history of Bitcoin has been an impediment to the original kind of earnest political idealism that fueled the crypto movement?
Yeah, I really like that question because it is a tough question that I had to wrestle with a lot, which is, when I first got into crypto, I was in my early 20s and I was sort of very idealistic, like you say, and pretty typical for the space at the time. And I was very much a libertarian. I thought that government should have no role in how we transact with one another on a voluntary basis. And more recently, I've had to question that sort of very one-sided or extreme position. And basically, one of the memories that really drove that was I was advising a nonprofit called Thorn. They essentially combat child abuse with the use of technology, and I was there just to kind of advise them on blockchain, and they were showing us a presentation just to introduce the topic, and they were showing literally like research that they'd done on dark web websites, and they had this incredible slide where it literally made my blood freeze. Well, not literally, but it made my blood freeze, which was essentially a pricing list of they had kidnapped someone and they were going to do like a live stream, and you could bid on different things that were going to happen during that live stream. And next to each thing was a Bitcoin address, and the Bitcoin address started with a 3, which is a pay to script hash address, which is a technology or standard that I help work on in the Bitcoin community. And so there's this technology that I helped create that is used for the most horrible purpose. And so ever since then, I've tried to take a little bit more responsibility as a technologist to try to think about how could my technology be used, how could it be abused, and how do I put some balances in where I still believe that government power needs to have checks and balances. I still believe that the government shouldn't just be able to spy on us secretly without any warrants and oversight by courts and such. But I also think that there has to be some enforcement mechanism. You can't just build purely anarchic utilities, because then you are essentially protecting and sheltering people doing very bad stuff.
Right. So how do you build that into technology? What are you doing differently at COIL or with the Interledger? That maybe brings a little bit more realism to some of the early idealism.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So in the case of, let me maybe contrast something that how Lightning Network works versus how Interledger works. So in the Lightning Network, the way that they architected it is that the sender decides the entire path that the payment packet is going to take. And as a result of that, they're able to use something often called onion routing, where you essentially wrap the message that you're trying to send in multiple layers of encryption, and each person that's forwarding your message is only unpacking one layer of encryption. And so they actually don't know where that message is ultimately headed or where it's coming from. And in Interledger, we've sort of taken the approach of something that works a little bit more like the internet, where the message is still encrypted. You don't know the data that someone's sending, but you can see the ultimate destination that it's headed towards. And we felt that that was important, from a perspective of being more in line with current regulation and being a little bit more compatible with how, say, the correspondent banking system works, and something that regulators would find palatable, while of course still protecting user privacy. And so if somebody was using Interledger for something really bad that was breaking laws in the country that they're in, you could essentially subpoena the connectors that are forwarding those packets, and you could figure out who they are. And we assume that that the wallet providers are licensed institutions, for example. And so there's certain things that just make it a bit more amenable to actually going after bad actors who use the system. But it was important to us that we still protect people's privacy and allowing them to transact with as much privacy as possible. Just there should be some backstop to that.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to invite everyone who's listening to DM us any questions you want me to ask Stefan. You could DM me directly or DM COIL. Stefan, one of the bewildering things about being a journalist these days is having to keep up with all the buzzwords and the new trends, and occasionally pretend that we understand them. So this is my opportunity to get you to explain various things to me. One of the popular topics in tech right now is, of course, Web3, the idea of a new web based on the blockchain, which is decentralized and based on tokens, and serves as this magical check to big platforms. And it's just such a polarizing topic right now. The battle's playing out on Twitter in particular. I'm curious what you think about it. Does the term mean anything to you?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting from my perspective, because I have one foot in what some would call the web 1.0, 2.0 space, where like I grew up with the web. I was a web developer for many years. And I still feel like that's a community that I'm a part of. And then obviously I spent many years in the blockchain community, and I feel like I have a part of that community. And so I'm kind of split right down the middle on this issue. And I think that where I sort of come down is in trying to apply blockchain technology, there were definitely a lot of cases where I found that it just wasn't a good fit. Namely, whenever you're trying to replace an entire complex system with an equivalent decentralized one, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's sort of like, think of it like this. If you had a new technology that helps you automate some industrial process, let's say you can automate car manufacturing better, you wouldn't introduce it into the market by making an entirely automatic factory, letting everyone go and just making the factory 100% automated, because there's probably going to be some low-hanging fruit automation that's easy to do, and some things that are really hard to automate. So you keep most of the people there, and you just start to make the processes that where the technology is most applicable more efficient. And so I think with blockchain, the way we're going right now is we're building these like very monolithic blockchains that are all or nothing. You either have to move everything onto it and fully live in the crypto universe, or it's just not compatible with anything. It doesn't work with anything else, right? And what I've always tried to do with my work with Interledger, and then also we were working on a smart contracts platform, Codius, which I'm still hoping we'll get back to one day. We've tried to make technologies that interface with centralized systems, with other types of architectures, and kind of bridge some of that gap, because I think that's honestly the biggest thing that's holding blockchain back from escaping the purely speculative realm, is better interoperability and better integration with both traditional systems, but also future systems that haven't been built yet.
Okay, so you're saying the real future isn't Web 2 or Web 3, it's something like Web 2.5, where they meet in the middle.
Well, it's whatever you call it, I'm probably not the right person to opine on what the best buzzword is. But if I look at what people currently understand under the term Web 3, it's sort of a monolithic architecture based around this blockchain, which is a database, and it also executes code. And the code can only address the data that's inside of that blockchain. And if you want to deal with anything else, you need some external system like an Oracle or a bridge or something like that that can connect that. And that's just a very clunky architecture. So I think that the blockchain space needs a paradigm shift where they move to a more flexible architecture, and then we can see more decentralized services that are easier to adopt, they're easier to integrate with other existing services. And that's when I see something like Web3 taking off more. And I think a lot of the people who are criticizing Web3 are really criticizing the current architecture of Web3, as well as some of the speculative excesses, of course.
Right. I thought the essay that was going around from a computer security researcher, Moxie Marlinspike, was pretty compelling. And he was arguing that a protocol moves more slowly than a platform. And the line that stuck out for me, if something is truly decentralized, it becomes very difficult to change and often remains stuck in time. But perhaps that's what you're talking about, that it's like assessing kind of the current state of Web3 and not the possible evolution.
Yeah, what he's talking about in the article is exactly the realization that drove me towards kind of working on Interledger and so on, which is when I was working on Bitcoin, I realized very quickly that it was very hard to make changes to the protocol. We had this thing called the hard fork wish list, which was all the changes that we thought would improve Bitcoin. And pay to script hash, the one I mentioned earlier that I helped work on, was one of them. But that one change took forever. It took like 8 months or something like that to get it actually deployed. And I extrapolated from that to some of the other changes that we had planned, some of which were much more complex. And I was like, this will take a long time. This will take 50 years to get it to where I think it needs to be. And so what I realized was there was a huge amount of wisdom in the architecture of the web and the internet, where you're only standardizing where different actors are interfacing. So like, for example, if I'm sending you a packet over the internet, well, I have to address it in some standard way with an IP address, and I have to have some things like a time to live, like how many hops can this packet take and so on. But it's really not that much that's globally standardized. And then all the other stuff, the complex stuff, like how does a packet go over a wire or over the airwaves or up to a satellite, or encoded as an optical signal, all that stuff is completely left up to other protocols and things that can adapt locally, and it's not standardized across the whole world. Whereas in most blockchains today, or the way blockchains work today, everything is sort of standardized globally, right? Like if you change anything about Bitcoin, everyone has to upgrade. And I very quickly realized that was not going to be viable, really, like, because any technology you invent, it immediately starts to become obsolete and needs to be upgraded. And this sort of original vision of like Bitcoin is pure math and it's timeless and so on just did not pan out. That's just not how technology works. And so I think the way forward is you standardize interoperability protocols, things that are very minimalistic, as simple as you can make them, which is exactly what we tried to do with Interledger. And then you allow people to innovate on top in terms of the applications and the use cases, and you allow people to innovate below in terms of, in this case, the ledgers and the currencies that people use, and you don't dictate what those should be.
Okay, well, put on your futurist hat for a minute and tell me what some of those applications and use cases are going to be. Like, how does Web3 at maturation look, and how does it affect daily life? And I don't know, let's pick a number, 20 years.
So this is where I say all the things that are going to sound absolutely hilarious in 30 years when I'm completely wrong. So some things that I'm thinking about are, when you take the comparison to the internet as a bit of a guide, what the internet really enabled was much more granular communication. So you could have a lot of smaller messages, more frequent messages, and a lot of that meant that it was not just messages from person to person, but also from computer to computer. And I think there's a bit of an analogy here where we could see a lot more payments between computers and a lot more granular payments where you're paying at the exact moment that it's needed, rather than aggregating a lot of payments together and making it one payment a month, or one payment where for example, in content, which is maybe an example where people can wrap their heads around, rather than paying Netflix and then Netflix pays all the different creators that contribute to the Netflix platform, it might be more viable to pay all the creators directly and be a little bit more, create more direct connections of commerce. That would be one example.
Well, that's a lot of destruction and disruption for intermediaries.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think to the extent that Netflix is adding a lot of value, like they're making really nice clients that work on my TV and on my iPad and everywhere else. Like, I do think that there will be a role for platforms. I just think that there's an opportunity to create different models, different alternatives, and ways to increase the efficiency in the system. Like, for example, there's a lot of streaming services that are smaller that don't have apps on every platform that I want to use them on. And it would be really nice if somebody made like a protocol that, someone can make a general streaming client that has all the features that I want, and I can still watch all the content from all the different streaming platforms that I like on it, for example. And I think some of that could be enabled if you have a standardized way to transfer value where I'm paying for different things, regardless of who made the app and if that's the same person who's running the platform.
So we're about a year into the NFT craze. I think it was about this time last year when Jack Dorsey sold his first tweet for $3 million, and it seemed like a joke then, and it seems very much real now. What do you think, Stefan? Is it a fad? Have you bought or sold any NFTs?
I have actually not. This is one thing that often surprises people when they talk to me, and obviously I'm very associated with the crypto space, but I'm not much of a crypto trader, and I'm not actually, even trying out a lot of stuff because I have certain things that I believe in and certain things that I'm interested in. I've not traded any NFTs. My opinion on it is that if you want to do ownership of digital goods and you're comfortable with the fact that it's obviously a little bit arbitrary, right? Like, I can say I own this NFT and it can be registered somewhere to me, but at the end of the day, it is still a file that someone else can copy, as people have pointed out, like Moxie, for example. But if you're comfortable with that idea, like storing the ownership of that on a blockchain is actually not a terrible idea, because if you store it on some server somewhere and that person who runs that server eventually turns it off, that's not a great outcome for the holders of that asset. And so, yeah, if you're looking for a use case for blockchain, it's not a bad use of the technology, which is something I don't say very often. I think a lot of proposed use cases for blockchains actually don't pan out, but this one does make sense from a purely technical perspective.
Okay, so on the spectrum of like utter faith that NFTs are the future on one side, and then the ridicule on the other, it sounds like you're kind of shading more towards the faith side, that you believe it maybe not all the kind of dramatic opportunity that proponents project for it, but that you think they're good applications.
Yeah, well, I think the important distinction here is that I think that if you think there's a use case for NFTs, I think using blockchain as the technology that powers them makes sense, especially if you're using, shameless plug, like some of the more efficient blockchains like XRP Ledger. Where I'm less certain and what's kind of outside of my area of expertise is how strong is that use case? Is that something that people will be interested in long term? Will people always, be collecting digital items that other people have created and that are sort of collectibles? Some of my friends who I recognize as more authorities on that question seem to think so. For me personally, I just don't know. Like, it seems definitely a lot of hype right now, which definitely won't last. And then the question is, like, when the hype is over, what will stick? What will people do long term?
I mean, it certainly seems like there is some absurdity. For example, the Bored Apes fad feels like, I don't know, kind of trading cards from the 80s or something. But people are buying and selling them for real money. So it's interesting.
It's a bit of a price of admission for this community and a status symbol, right? It's sort of like if you have one of these certain rare NFTs, it might give you access to a certain Discord server or a certain event or to certain people. And for if you're a crypto entrepreneur or something like that, and you care about those connections, that might be worth that much to you. Again, I can't say it's not worth it to me, but I'm also in the very nice situation that I have a reputation and I'm a well-known person in the space, and so maybe I don't need that help. But for somebody who feels that they need it, if they think so, that's more power to them.
Right. Okay. Next topic: the metaverse. We're seeing major technology companies rebrand themselves, and many of its competitors all moving towards this vision, which we've been talking about in the industry for a long time, of virtual reality, and not just for games, right? To live our digital lives. I remember, Stefan, you being at one point a prolific gamer. How much interest and faith do you have in the metaverse?
Yeah, metaverse falls into that category of buzzwords where I'm not really completely understanding what's new about it, but everyone seems to be excited about it. Another example like that would be cloud. Someone told me this anecdote, which I don't have any source for that, so take it with a grain of salt. But apparently, it was like two salespeople at a large enterprise tech company talking to each other, and one person was like, "I don't really understand what cloud is all about. It seems like we're still just selling servers like we always have." And the other person says, well, we're still selling the same servers, but now they sell a lot better. And so I think for me, Metaverse is a little bit in that category where, like, we've seen massively MMORPGs, like massive multiplayer games. Like, I remember I grew up with World of Warcraft was a big one, and I actually recently revisited that, which was a lot of fun. And so for me, like, adding more immersion with VR and adding more integration with social networks are all cool incremental changes. I don't think it's such a game changer. Like, I remember playing around with Second Life many years ago, which had a lot of hype, where you could have, like I think IBM did like an entire virtual campus in Second Life, and you can still see the ruins of that, which it's actually kind of fun and eerie to walk around. Yeah, it's all like I don't know if it still is today, but like when I checked it out like maybe 5 years ago or something like that, it was all still there, and you could like walk around in all these abandoned buildings and abandoned, areas where people clearly were very excited once upon a time. On the walls, you would still see the bulletin board where there's like a meeting, and of course the date was like long in the past. So I don't know. I
have to tell you a crazy story. I was interested, and I vaguely remember Nintendo had a virtual reality gaming set called Virtual Boy. And I went to research it, and I went to the Wikipedia page, and I was scrolling down, and there was a photo. It said like man playing Nintendo's Virtual Boy in a like Japanese arcade, and the photo was of me. It was like grabbed from Twitter, from Flickr, circa like 2003. Just bizarre, but like, and indication of how long these ideas have been in vogue, and now here they are back again.
Totally, and sometimes a buzzword can be a catalyst, right? Like sometimes you don't really reach mass adoption, and then suddenly no real technical innovation happens, but a big wave of investment and interest comes along, and everyone wants to check it out and be part of it. And I think it is actually interesting to think about, how things like NFTs and the Metaverse correlate or interact, where like it's always been a popular way to monetize these kinds of platforms, to sell things like items and so on, but it's always been obviously done centrally, where you have like the operator of the platform ultimately being the one who tracks the ownership of any of these virtual assets. And to my earlier point, like it is actually quite interesting to track ownership where even if that original operator goes away, I can still trade and still use those assets. And so it makes it just a lot more attractive to own one of these assets if I don't have to trust, XYZ gaming company to keep the servers running many years into the future.
Right. Although that is certainly not the direction that the industry appears to be going in. It feels like we're going to get many metaverses, each of them wholly owned and controlled by your like friendly local social network.
Well, that's I think because of the economics, and it'd be very interesting to see how the industry tackles that. But like one of the things I was thinking about is like, how does Twitter, since we're on Twitter Spaces right now, how did they decide what blockchains and what technologies to support in terms of, they have NFT based avatars now, right? And so how do they decide which platforms to support? And at some point, will social media platforms, which is ultimately where you'll want to use your NFTs, like games and social media platforms, the ones that are the most popular will have the most influence in terms of which technologies will they choose. And it's possible that there will be sort of a standard that emerges eventually where like, okay, that's the one everyone supports. Or it's possible that it actually becomes a point of monetization where like you have different platforms paying to be included and paying for that access. So very interesting to see how that develops. To your point, we could also see like total siloification where like, every major social media platform and every major game has their own standard for NFTs that they're trying to push. But that seems like not a stable state. So probably
right.
some winner will emerge from that.
And you could imagine different countries also exerting their influence and authority over the local metaverses. Obviously, authoritarian states aren't going to want the free for all.
Yeah, and to my again, I keep coming back to this point of interoperability because that's ultimately the approach that I'm most interested in, because I think it is the most powerful and the best outcome for society. And so the question is, how do we bring about that outcome, which is, I have total choice, right? Like I can use any blockchain to mint and store my NFT, and I can use it everywhere. Like that's the thing that we all want. And it's interesting as a technologist to think about how do you get there. Now, I've probably thought about it more in the context of payments, and sort of Interledger is my answer and how do we get there. But you could do the exact same exercise for NFTs and think about what would an NFT interoperability protocol look like. So maybe that's something that will be a future project for myself or someone else who's thinking in a similar vein.
Well, I'm getting a lot of good questions via DM, some of which I actually understand, some of which I don't. And I want to get to those in a second, but let's just talk a little bit more about monetization on the web. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about it at a time when there's really an existential crisis, for creators, for developers, and even big companies like Facebook, and as Apple and Android changes the rules of targeted advertising. So, what do you think the future of monetization on the web looks like, particularly for creators who are just kind of trying to find their way amid all these giant tech companies?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a huge topic. So let me try to unpack that a little bit. I think that part of the interest in Web3 is a bit of a backlash to that current model, where it's turned out that the most competitive are really highly scalable, very centralized platforms like the social media companies and ad networks that dominate tech today. And it's sort of interesting to think about why they've been so, what the huge advantages were that put them into that position. Because as we all know, the web didn't necessarily start out that way. It started out with, pretty flat and a lot of different websites. And, I remember a lot of people were running their own website, myself included, running many websites at the time. And so how did it become so consolidated? And I think the business model is definitely one of the biggest reasons, right? Like, you're looking at the fact that if I just have traffic, that alone doesn't make me any money. I have to also have some way to monetize that traffic and that attention that my site is getting. And the two dominant models that have emerged, one is monthly subscriptions, and the other one is advertising. Both of those models have huge economies of scale. In the case of advertising, if I have a huge number of visitors, or if I'm an ad network, like, I can have more data over about each user. And so obviously advertising to a user that is profiled and where I know a lot about them, I can target the ads better, I make a lot more money. And so obviously larger ad networks are always going to outcompete smaller ones, all other things equal. And then with subscription services, well, people have limited budgets and they have limited attention spans, and so you're going to sign up for the must-have subscription services, which are going to be the ones with the most content that's relevant to you. And so you're going to end up with a consolidation there. So both of those business models have sort of built-in consolidation force built in. And the counterpoint to that we think is like, well, why are we even using those two models? Can't we just do it the way we do it in basically every other business, where if I go to a grocery store, like, they're not going to show me ads as a way to pay for my groceries. Like, I'm just going to pay. And so if you had an efficient enough payment mechanism that is efficient, not just in terms of how the money is transferred, but also how the payment authorization happens. Like, if I had to enter my credit card number on every website I go to, I probably wouldn't use a service like that. And so it has to be in all facets extremely efficient. And that's essentially what we built with COIL, where we have a monthly subscription, and every website you go to, it sends a little bit of money to that website. Now, obviously, that needs its own kind of scale, which is like, it needs the standard needs to have scale. There needs to be enough websites that adopt that. But at least as far as the technology is concerned, like, it seems to work. So it's kind of interesting to think about, when there is an alternative business model, how do those dynamics change? And to me, that's actually more important than what people seem most focused on in the Web3 discussion, which is more the technical architecture rather than the business models.
Right, but it poses the kind of mother of all two-sided marketplace problems, right? Like, how do you get the critical mass of creators, and how do you get the critical mass of publishers to go and embrace another standard? I guess if the economics are better, they'll move, but the current players have a lot of advantages and can kind of outcompete on price, and they've got the advantage of data.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of an open standard, is like, it creates an opportunity for anyone who can answer that question to make a lot of money for themselves, right? Just like, when the web first came about, the question was like, well, if there's all these different web servers, and sure, there's links between them, but really, how do you find anything when there's these trillions of web pages? And Google had the answer for that, and so they made a lot of money. So just because there's no built-in token doesn't mean you can't make money in that system. And so what I'm expecting, or what I'm hoping for, is that as we continue to develop the technology and we continue to open it up to more and more people, there'll be more and more innovation coming from other folks who have answers to some of these questions. And I've sort of had to realize in a very humbling way that I don't have all the answers. And so I've kind of shifted focus to increasing access in Interledger, and getting more wallets with more functionality that allows other people to build whatever their vision for Interledger is. So that's kind of where we are now.
I mean, I think this is precisely where a couple of listeners are asking pointed questions. So at Dennis NYC _edu asks, how will end users experience COIL in 3 to 5 years? What's on the development roadmap? And then Elliot Lee at Intelliot asks, he's asking, yeah, what are you most excited about for COIL in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, so the project that we're fully focused on right now is an open source project. It's actually not a COIL commercial product. It's a complete open source project, and it's called Rafiki. And you know, without going into too much like technical jargon, it's essentially an open source implementation of everything that a wallet would have to implement, a financial institution who wanted to offer an Interledger wallet would have to implement to offer all the things that Interledger has to offer. And where this came from was we realized that like the current wallets in the Interledger ecosystem actually only offer very limited functionality. Really, you can only receive payments. And so, you know, that's okay for COIL in our use case, our current use case with this $5 subscription, because we send the money out, other people can receive it into Interledger wallet. But it's very limiting if you want to do anything else. And so we diagnosed that the reason for that was that wallet companies just didn't have the bandwidth to build a whole Interledger stack where you can send money and you can do subscriptions and you can authorize third-party applications to access your wallet and all this kind of stuff. And so we embarked on this journey to build an open source implementation of all of that so that wallets can deploy that open source stack very easily and not have to do all that work themselves. So that's what we're focused on right now. And then as that rolls out, I think we will, you know, reassess and try to figure out like what new products can we build around that. You know, what other problems are emerging in the market that we can help solve. But right now we're just pretty focused on this open source project because we think that's the next thing that's needed from Interledger.
Okay, so that's Rafiki, and that helps me understand half of this question from Mickey B. Fresh, or at Mr. Fresh Time, a great Twitter handle. So I'm just going to read this, Stefan, and maybe you can translate it. Mickey B. Fresh writes, I'd like to hear about the plans for Tiger Beetle and Rafiki and how they will come together. What else are you building for Tiger Beetle DB for?
Yeah, great question, and one that actually has a fairly direct and simple answer, which is, so just for those who don't know, so I explained what Rafiki is, and so I'll quickly explain what Tiger Beetle is. So Tiger Beetle is a very high performance distributed accounting database. So if you're, you know, any kind of institution that's recording transactions, so whether that's a bank or a wallet provider or anything like that, you can use Tiger Beetle to record lots and lots of transactions very quickly. And so the way that those two come together is, well, Rafiki is an open source stack that's, among other things, needs to record transactions. And so we're actually planning to use and using Tiger Beetle as the back end for Rafiki. And so what that'll do is it'll mean that if you deploy Rafiki as a wallet provider, you can get, with very modest hardware requirements, very, very high throughput, very large number of packets that you're processing. And so that's going to further decrease the cost for wallet providers to adopt Interledger and create a better ratio between the functionality that it can offer to their customers and the functionality that Interledger offers in general versus the cost that they have to pay in terms of server and integration costs. So we're really trying to make that ratio as favorable as possible.
Okay, well, we're running out of time, so let me ask the question that I patiently waited 45 minutes to ask Stefan, which is, as some people probably know, you became sort of quite famous recently for, what's the right word? Not losing 7,000 Bitcoin, but I guess forgetting the password, right? And it's come to really dominate. I have to say, it's come to dominate your Google mentions. I don't know how comfortable you are with that, but yeah, I mean, because that was such a high-profile story, give us an update. I in fact, when this Twitter Spaces was announced, some people reached out to me asking, professing that they could help you and wanted an introduction. So I'm sure you've gotten a lot of these requests. What's the current status on the missing password?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't really mind the attention around that. I think that for me, it's highlighting a big issue, which is key management is hard. And so hopefully a lot of people that have read that story have taken it away from it, that they need to think about how they're storing their passwords and how they're storing their own keys and how to make sure that they don't lose access. And hopefully it's saved, one or two people's life savings in the process. In terms of updates around that, I've been moving to a different country. I'm still in the process of kind of getting set up in my new home and everything. So that's kind of taken center stage. And of course, I'm also still fully focused on COIL and trying to drive COIL forward and Interledger forward. So it's been, as crazy as that might sound to a lot of people, it's been tough to really find a time to worry about the wallet too much. For me, the wallet it's a huge amount of money. There's a lot that I could do with it, both for myself personally, but also in the world. And so I am planning to recover it, but I also have always had a very long-term perspective when it came to crypto. I don't think crypto is going anywhere anytime soon. Maybe the price will be lower for a while, but it might come back. So I'm not in a rush to recover it, and I also only get one shot. So when I do take that shot, I want to have everything fully teed up. In terms of people reaching out, I'm obviously super grateful for all the people who've reached out. There are some things where I'm like, okay, I've heard this enough times now, so please don't reach out suggesting hypnosis. I've heard this enough times. The people that have been the most helpful are the people who have kind of a technical, who are working in that area of like forensic data recovery. In particular, people who are doing that on a professional level, and so I've had some really helpful contacts that have come out of this public attention. So I really appreciate that. And I'm also talking to some folks who are looking to help other people to recover their wallets. And so that's something I'm still thinking about, is like, how can I use some of this attention to help other people who've lost coins and kind of help them. So more to come on that.
Stefan, at least you're not the guy from the UK who's trying to excavate the local landfill where he ditched his hard drive.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I wish him the best. Yeah, that's tough. I'd have to have my wallet, I just have to break into it.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're running out of time. I queued up one last question for you, which is this: Do you have as much equal or less conviction about Bitcoin and crypto as the future of finance as you once did? Where's your overall sentiment right now?
So that's a really interesting one, and it definitely does shift over time as I learn more about the space and different things happen. So when I first got into Bitcoin, it seemed like the solution, I think, and then I realized that because of this factor that I mentioned, which is it can't evolve quickly enough, I started to move away from the idea that like Bitcoin is the answer, and I started to look for a new answer. And I think as far as the use case that I'm interested in, which is moving money around the world, I think that Interledger, obviously a somewhat self-serving answer, but I believe that is a better solution. That's why I'm spending all my time on it. I think that the other use case, which is having a store of value, as well as in the case of other cryptos like XRP, for example, they're focused on being sort of a transactional asset, like a way to provide liquidity around the world. I still think those use cases are very much alive, and I still have a lot of optimism around those use cases. So it turned out to be useful, just not for the thing that I thought it was useful for, which is purely payments.
Interesting. Stefan, aka Just Moon, this has been great. It's great talking to you again. Hope I get to see you again soon. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope people got something out of it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.